Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be talking about today is the solved murder of Rebecca Schaeffer. This case actually happened before stalking became illegal, and unfortunately Rebecca at the time was in the limelight. She was out there in the public eye, and the wrong person became obsessed with her, and it just ended so tragically. I'd just like to let you know, I mean no disrespect to anyone I talk about, I've just gathered the information from the internet and compiled it into a video for educational purposes. Rebecca Schaeffer was born on the 6th of November in 1967 in Eugene, Oregon. She was the only child to parents Dana and Benson. Dana was actually a writer who worked in Portland Community College as an instructor, and her father was a child psychologist. She was raised in a Jewish household, and when she was young she actually wanted to be a rabbi. That was until she realised that she had a real passion for drama when she joined junior school at Lincoln High School. She actually started modelling, and that is when she found this new love and this new dream career. She did really well in it actually. She started to get jobs in modelling, in kind of department store catalogues, in TV commercials. She also started working as an extra in TV film sets. And she was just really doing very well for herself. She was just kind of this naturally beautiful girl, and it just really worked well for her in her career and into what she wanted to do. She had this confidence about her to just go for it, and she did. In 1984 her career was really booming. Now she was kind of classed as this girl next door kind of model. She wasn't like really tall or anything like that, but she had really pretty face. She had these really beautiful curls, which was kind of all the range in the 80s, like perms and things like that. But she kind of felt like she wanted to make it more big time, and so she decided that she wanted to move to New York. This would allow her to have more access to sort of more auditions and be able to just expand on her career. So in August of 1984, her mother and her father, agreed that they would allow her to go. They agreed that she would go kind of just for the summer to test the waters and see how it went. And it went really well. And by the end of it, she wanted to stay because she had just fell in love with New York. Her career was doing well. And she was only 16 at the time. So obviously it was very worrying for her parents to have their daughter living in New York and not with them. She was still quite young. But it was her passion. It was what she wanted to do, and they didn't stand in her way. This was such an exciting step for Rebecca, and she went on to get a role in something called Guiding Light, which was only a short-term role, but she also enrolled in professional children's school. Then in 1984, Rebecca auditioned and got the part in One Life to Live, where she would play a character called Annie Barr.
Know each other real well or anything.
And that was to be for the next 6
months. Get yourself together? I mean, aren't you liberated or anything?
Liberated enough to tell you where you can get off.
It's quite impressive that she was able to get onto this very quickly. There were so many people who strived to become an actress and just were never able to, and she just kind of slotted into it so easily and so well, and it was quite impressive, as I said. As she was doing this, Rebecca continued to look for modelling roles, and her acting side of things was going really well, but unfortunately her modelling wasn't, because in New York they were looking for sort of high fashion modelling, and in those you had to be quite tall, and as I said, she was quite short. She was 5'7", and she just wasn't tall enough to be a high fashion model, and so she didn't get any of them sort of photo shoots for that. And in New York, that's what they wanted. They wanted these really tall girls to do these fashion shoots. When she finished her 6 months in TV, she really struggled to find work. And this pushed Rebecca to move to Tokyo, Japan in 1985 at the age of just 17. So she was so brave to keep doing these big sort of life-changing moves to different countries. It was basically because her agency told her that she might get more opportunities over there, like in the modelling style of it anyway. And so she takes another risk. She goes over there looking for work. But again, she struggled due to her height, and so she had to come back. When she comes back to New York, she decides that in fact she's going to concentrate more on the acting side of it, because as I said, she loved New York, she wanted to stay there, and she was doing well on her acting, but it was just the modelling that she couldn't find the work with, so she kind of dropped that and concentrated more on the acting. And it works for her. She gets a small role in Woody Allen's Radio Days, Steven Spielberg's Amazing Stories, but it wasn't actually earning a living for her, so she had to fund kind of that passion and that dream by doing waitressing. One last modelling job comes up for her for 17 magazine, and Through this, a TV producer in LA actually notices her. They are casting for a role in a show that they are obviously making called My Sister Sam. They contact her agents, they do a screen test, and she easily wins the role of Patricia Russell, also known as Patty. At the time of her casting, she was living in like this 2-bed apartment shared with 6 other women, and her phone had just been cut off, so she was struggling, and obviously she jumped at the chance to get this part. At the time, her agent couldn't even contact her for phone because it had just been cut off. So the way she told her that she'd got this part was leaving a note on the outside of a door. So that's how much she was actually struggling. But this was a lifeline for her. Rebecca moved to LA in 1986. Another big move. The show airs once a week on CBS, and Rebecca's fame just absolutely soars. The first series was a real hit with everyone. Everyone loved it.
I kind of get a kick out of having my kid sister live with me. I mean, of course it has its disadvantages. Curfew.
Rebecca was always said to be a pleasure to work with. She was always very courteous, and she was always willing to learn. So she would not just sit around and be one of them kind of divas, I guess. She was always there and ready to learn, asking questions, and was just very mature for her age. She went on to live in a rented house on her own, and it was probably because she had been living in that house with 6 other girls and she just wanted a bit of privacy. She was quite sensitive and she just wanted a quiet life. But some did say that she was quite lonely too. Now, going back to the show, although the first season was a real success and a real hit, the second was not so much. Views begin to plummet and the show is actually cancelled in 1988. She was devastated, of course, but the show had opened up all these doors and everyone kind of knew who she was now. And she did carry on with her acting. She did supporting roles and things like that. She was on TV. She also became a spokeswoman for a children's charity called Thursday's Child. Her life was going really well. She had a boyfriend, Brad Silvering, who she'd actually met on a blind date. She had roles in a couple of films and she was actually considered for the role of Pretty Woman. But she was actually classed as being too young and too girlish for the role, and the role was actually given to Julia Roberts, who coincidentally was only 9 days older than her. And you know how big Julia Roberts is now and how that role sort of did really well for her. So who knows, if Rebecca had gotten that role, maybe she would have been like as big as Julia Roberts. Maybe she would have been one day anyway, who knows. But it just goes to show that her name was out there and that she was being considered for these big roles. And as much as her name was out there and now she was in the public eye, the one thing that she wasn't aware of was that one of her fans was becoming increasingly obsessed with her and had actually stalked her for the last 3 years. She literally knew nothing about it. Robert John Bardot had an unhealthy obsession with famous females from a very young age. It was even stated that he was a ticking time bomb, which begs the question as to why nobody did anything about it. Nobody, I don't know, got him sectioned, pulled him to the side, tried to deal with his mental health. Nobody did anything. I guess you never truly think that this person could ever do any harm. And so you just kind of brush it under the rug. Yes, okay, he was stalking women, but he would never do anything to them, right? He was hospitalised twice, he wrote threatening letters to teachers, and he was actually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. At around 16, he dropped out of high school and he got a job as a janitor in a fast food restaurant called Jack in a Box. Around this time was when My Sister Sam was being aired on TV, and so he was at work and that was on the screens, and so he was watching it every day, and he became obsessed with initially the character that Rebecca was playing, which was Patty. But over time, he did become obsessed with Rebecca herself. Now, Rebecca was very humble and really did feel like she needed to give back to kind of her fans. And so she had received a lot of mail off them and things like that. And she would kind of respond to pretty much all of them with like a shot of her head saying, "Yours is one of the nicest letters I've received." And John Bardot sent her in a letter, and that is what the response he got back. Hollywood nowadays are very careful of what they say in response to fans. They don't want to lead them, they don't want to push them too far away, but they also don't want to let them in too close. So normally they'd just send a picture with like a signature, but not much was thought of it. And Rebecca, being just a nice, caring girl that she was, that was how she responded. And that was how she responded to John. Even though this message was sent pretty much to everyone, Robert John Bardot was clearly unstable, and he took that note as that she knew who he was now, and if he went up and met her kind of face to face, she would instantly fall in love with him like he was in love with her. So that's exactly what he did. As I said, Robert stalked Rebecca for 3 years. And in this time, he would write countless letters to her. But not only that, in 1987, he actually travelled to LA, basically just to try and meet her. He went to the set of My Sister Sam, and where Rebecca was working at the time, and he tried to get through to meet her, to get in. Security obviously wouldn't let him in. A month later, he comes back. This time, he has a knife with him, so that just goes to show how unstable he is. Security once more, don't let him in, and turn him away again. But of course, Rebecca has no idea what's going on. They never really tell her. They tell, I guess, the managers and things, but who knows? People might turn up like that all the time. This was when he returned home and actually started to focus on other women. He began to focus on Debbie Green and Madonna. He'd also been previously obsessed with Samantha Smith, who actually unfortunately passed away on a plane crash in 1985. But it just goes to show how obsessed this guy was. He was stalking people. But it didn't take long for his obsession to shift back onto Rebecca when he watched the comedy The Class Struggle in Beverly Hills in 1989, which again featured Rebecca. There's a scene in the actual film in where she appears in bed with another actor.
Willie, you need to get a girlfriend before you turn into a pervert.
And Robert, when he saw that, was absolutely furious. He was just so mad about her being in bed with another actor. I mean, it was TV, it was all for show, but he was unstable. He was just so jealous that he decided that, in his own words, this is actually what he said, she had become another Hollywood whore and that she should be punished. On the 17th of July, he calls her agent up and just casually asks for her address, which, of course, they did not give. I mean, how he thought that would even work, I don't know. Hi, can I have Rebecca's address? No? Okay. They're never going to give it you. But he tried anyway, he rang. It didn't really matter though. They refused, but he had already learned of a man called Arthur Richard Jackson, and it was from an article in People magazine. He had actually stalked and stabbed actress Teresa Sedana in 1982. Luckily, she survived the attack, but obviously there was a piece done on it, and he had actually used a private investigator to get her address. So that sparked his idea, and that was what he was then going to do. So he did. He contacted a private investigator. He said that he was looking for a long lost friend. He paid them $250 to find and give him Rebecca's address. The private investigator managed to get her address through DMV records, which he could have actually done himself, and I'll explain that a little bit more later on. But he then tries to buy a gun. He fills in this form and he puts down that he has mental health issues, and obviously the clerk refuses him because of that. He then goes mad and says, "Can I fill in the form again?" Which of course she says no, because you're just going to now put that you don't have mental health issues when you've already told me that you do. So this form gets put behind the counter, basically stating a big note saying, do not provide this man with a gun. But the next day, it doesn't matter, he goes to his brother and he convinces him to buy him a gun. So his brother goes, with him stood right next to him, bearing in mind, and buys a .357 Magnum handgun.
Robert Bardo obtained hollow point bullets. He read somewhere that the victim won't stand a chance. A hollow point bullet goes into a victim and explodes inside the victim.
And then Robert goes off to Los Angeles to find Rebecca. This would be the third time he'd actually gone to LA and travelled all the way there just to try and find her. In July 1989, Robert, at the age of 19, goes around Rebecca's town showing a photo of her just to make sure that he's got the right area, the right house. So he approaches Rebecca's apartment in West Hollywood and he rings the door buzzer. Now, the intercom wasn't actually working, so Rebecca had to physically come down to the door to answer it herself. She was actually expecting a script for an audition that she had in The Godfather Part 3. So she thought that that's what it was. So she answers the door, she finds that it isn't a script, but Robert stood there. She finds it odd, but she is nice enough to him. She wasn't a malicious, nasty person, she was a nice girl, so they share a bit of pleasantries, they talk for a little while. He shows the letter that she'd sent him with the autograph and things like that, and in the end, she kind of shakes his hand, wishes him a nice day, and politely asks that he doesn't come back to her home again, which is obviously something that you wouldn't want. You don't want your fans turning up your house every day, especially not one that's going to keep coming all the time. So she asked him nicely. Robert left and Rebecca goes back to her day. But this made Robert angry because she was supposed to fall in love with him. She was supposed to open that door and just throw herself on him, and that didn't happen, so it made him angry. He went to a nearby diner for a little while, and once he'd finished, he went back to Rebecca's home just an hour later. He said later on that he only returned because he had a CD and a note that he had actually forgotten to give her, but The gun in his possession kind of says otherwise. Rebecca once more answers the door, thinking that it's the script that she's been waiting for. She's having this casual day, she's in a dressing gown, and she's just kind of lazing around, expecting to receive the script and just practice it, I guess. So she sees Robert there again, and rightly so, she's angry. She's politely asked him, she's been nice to him, she's politely asked him to not come back, and there he is again. She made it clear that she didn't want him there, didn't want him to come back, and I wouldn't be happy either if he's literally turned back up again when she'd asked him not to. He said that she had a cold look on her face, which probably she did, because she'd asked him nicely to not come back, and there he was again, and it probably shocked her and surprised her and made her angry. She said that she said in this kid, she had like a kid voice and said like a little brat that he was wasting her time. He then goes on to say that was a callous thing to say to a fan, you know. I grabbed the door, gun still in the bag. I grabbed the trigger, I come around and kapow. She's screaming, and it's like, oh God. Robert shot Rebecca at point blank in the chest twice. She's still stood in the doorway kind of her apartment building as he fled the scene. Initially, he thought about killing himself and doing kind of a Romeo and Juliet scene where he's lied on top of her as she's dying and he shoots himself, but then he decided that he was going to flee instead. A neighbour heard the shots and the screaming and rushes to her door. He sees her on the door, her feet kind of trapped in between the doorway and the frame. He calls an ambulance and Rebecca still clinging on to life, and the paramedics do everything they could. They take her to hospital, but despite everyone's best efforts, she was actually pronounced dead just 30 minutes after arriving at the hospital. Police begin to immediately look into Rebecca's case. And the next day, back in his hometown, motorists call the police to say that a man is running into traffic on Interstate 10 and that he's trying to basically get hit by cars. It was Robert John Bardo. They arrest him and he tells them outright how shocked he is by the murder of Rebecca Schaeffer, which just immediately incriminates him basically. It's just such a strange thing to just randomly come out with. Robert's image was then sent over to LA where witnesses placed him at the scene. They saw him and they said, yep, that's the one, that's the man. And they confirmed him as the shooter. He was arrested for it, and as soon as he was arrested, he admitted to shooting Rebecca. Robert went to a bench trial, which means that the outcome, instead of being decided by a jury, is actually decided by one judge. Now, he only agreed to this to basically pull the death penalty off the table. In October of 1991, Robert is found guilty and sentenced to life with no chance of parole for the capital murder of Rebecca Schaeffer. In 2007, he was stabbed 11 times by another inmate, but miraculously managed to survive that attack. As of 2020, he's still serving his life sentence at the Avenal State Prison in California, where he most likely will remain until his death. Throughout this case and others like this, the laws have really changed. The Driver's Privacy and Protection Act was brought in, and this act basically stops the DMV from releasing people's private information, which, to be honest, when I looked into this case, I couldn't even believe that they did that. So this form that this private investigator filled in, he could have done that. You just go to the DMV, you fill in this information on who you want personal details and why, which you can just say anything, pretty much, it's just a form. And they give it to you, which is just so disgraceful. People weren't even safe in the privacy of their own homes because they were just giving it out to anyone. Don't get me wrong, I don't believe that they would ever think that something like that would happen, that it would be utilised in that way, but after the incident in 1982, when it was first utilised that way, you would have thought they would have put in some measures to kind of prevent that, to stop that. And maybe that could have prevented it from happening to Rebecca. Maybe he would have found another way to get to her. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he would have got distracted with somebody else and Rebecca may have still been alive today. Who knows? As I said in the beginning, at the time, stalking wasn't actually illegal. It was kind of thought that if you were famous, it was something you just had to deal with and just get used to. But cases like this one helped to change all of that. And her death kind of sparked the entire thing. In 1989, LAPD created a threat management unit, and that was the first ever team created to prevent and help with stalking cases. This rippled out across the US, and by 1993, every state had anti-stalking laws, which is a really amazing thing. I found this case so sad because poor Rebecca was just so humble and so nice and just such an aspiring girl with a really sort of fantastic career ahead of her, and one unhealthy obsession caused her senseless death. But it may have helped the lives of countless others, all the other stalking victims, and that is a legacy that her family can be proud of. I know, unfortunately, it didn't help her, but her case sparked it all, and that is something that you can be proud about. Just so tragic. She could have been this really big name in Hollywood. It could have been a name that everyone knew. She had such a good career prospect, and it's just awful to think how the events unfolded and how he ended up getting her address and how it just kind of all fell into place for him. It's just so tragic. But yeah, that's the end of the case. If you guys have any suggestions, let me know. I'll look into them for you. Give me a big thumbs up if you've enjoyed this video, and subscribe to my channel for similar content. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the case of Rebecca Schaeffer. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.